and welcome to today's episode of Authentic Achievements, where I am delighted to be joined by my good friend, Amy Rowlinson. Amy, welcome.
Hello, hello.
Oh, I'm so looking forward to this chat. I could get started straight away, but before I do, let me share with the audience, in case they don't know about you, a little bit more about you and what's brought you here. So Amy Rowlinson is shining a light on what's possible when you focus on why. She empowers people to forge their own path to create a purposeful, sustainable, and fulfilling way of life. As a life purpose coach, podcast strategist, and podcaster, Amy's chosen mission is to give a living legacy of inspiration, insight, and knowledge, and create long-lasting, positive ripple effects. On her podcast, Focus on Why, Amy provides uplifting and relatable conversations designed to inspire listeners to take purposeful action. Her book, Focus on Why, Creating a Purposeful Way of Life, comes out on the 24th of October. And I had the absolute privilege of reading it before it actually went for final edit. And I can tell you it's worth reading. I highly recommend it. I couldn't put it down. And in fact, went on and read it a second time and can't wait for my copy. But Amy, I love it. But can you tell the audience more about it? Because it's such a unique journey, isn't it, to get to that book?
Yeah, and you're not the only one who has given me that. The best feedback you could possibly have as an author is that I couldn't put it down and that I read it in one sitting and then I started reading it again. So thank you, Kim, and thank you so much, Kim-Adele, for this incredible opportunity to share it. So, the story is a tricky one. It's not straightforward. I had this idea to write a book. It came about in a creative writing session with a coach, Erin Chamberlain, and I wanted to tell a story where my grandfather was with me as a child. This is an actual childhood memory, or many childhood memories of him sitting down and telling me stories. He was a TV, radio playwright. That's what he did. It was his living. So he wrote for a living. He told stories for a living, and he would tell me stories from as young as I can remember. And so I thought, well, I'd love to be able to use that format and have hidden, embedded life lessons that I could share, things that I've taken on board, probably from him, but also just through life, through lessons I've learned on the podcast, just all with a purpose focus. And then I thought, well, how could I possibly write from his perspective? He was this brilliant storyteller. I couldn't match that. So I hit a huge writing block. I was listening to a podcast out on a dog walk one lunchtime, and I heard somebody say that they were offering a mindset coaching session. I was like, well, I need that. I'm a coach, but you always need help yourself. Everyone will go to someone else for help. So that's what I did. I reached out, and she took me through this meditation to help unblock this limiting belief I had, which was that I didn't think that I could write the book. I didn't think that I was able to convey and persuade or encourage people with my words. Wow. So what happened was she encouraged me to have this meditation, and my grandfather was there. And I had this dialogue with him. Now, I'm fully aware, Kim-Adele, that I am not deluded. This was me voicing both sides of the dialogue. I know that.
Yeah.
It did feel real. It did feel like I was there with him. And essentially, he gave me this fabulous pep talk and really gave me the confidence to recognize that the podcasting work I'd been doing was an extension of his broadcasting career, that I've been telling stories for years in my work as a professional speaker and also as a podcaster. This was no different. I could do it. And so with that sort of renewed confidence, I realized that yes, I have been creating positive ripple effects through my podcast, through my work. I then set about writing. But what then happened was the next month, my grandmother, unfortunately, had a fall. I got a call to say I needed to go to the hospital straight away. I did. And literally within 24 hours, we had to say goodbye. Yeah. It was heart-wrenching. We were planning her 90th birthday that summer. And yeah, it was just a real shock. So I was going through the thing with my mum, and I found a box. In that box, there was many things that belonged to my grandfather that we'd never seen the light of day. Absolutely, my mum hadn't seen them. I hadn't seen them. There were short stories in there. There were photographs. There were prison keys, like a fob that you have, like the dog tags you have from being a prisoner of war, all sorts of things. And at the bottom of that was a handwritten journal that my grandfather had kept for 5 years as a prisoner of war. And I picked it up and I opened it. In fact, I've got it here. Let me show you.
Oh, please do.
So this is the book, and it's, there we go. It's a commonplace scrapbook, and it's September 1939 to April 1945. And I opened it, and it just so happened that the page I opened to it was on the 30th of September, 1942. And I read this: proposal to write, way of life, to meet the need for a planned life, to meet every circumstance of life, every facet of living. Now, I close out every podcast episode of Focus on Why with have a purpose, have a plan, focus on why. And I'm thinking, my grandfather got there first. He beat me to it. He already had this idea. But as far as I know, he never actually fulfilled and wrote that particular idea and fleshed it out. So long story short, I realized, of course, now I can use his words to tell his side of the story. And I can write this collaborative book that I wanted to write using these journal extracts alongside my framework for purpose, alongside some of the stories that I've experienced myself, and also those I've witnessed and had the privilege of listening to on my podcast. So that's what I did. I put together the book, and it's taken me the best part of a couple of years just to really understand the way that was going to look. So from January 2022 to having the idea, I didn't really start writing properly until the end of December 2023. And I submitted my first draft in January of 2024 this year. And here I am for the 24th of October this year, and it's out there, and it's going to be available as an ebook, as a paperback, and also an audio book. So I have the absolute joy of being able to share that I've done it with my daughter's boyfriend. We've recorded it, and he's voicing my grandfather's younger version of who he was. He was in his early 20s at that time. So that's how we've represented it. And we've actually read it together, and it's being put together as we speak for the launch time.
Oh, Amy, I mean, what an experience that must be. And what a legacy. I mean, you've taken your grandfather's legacy, you've added your own part to it and created a lasting legacy, and then also created a further legacy with your daughter's boyfriend. I mean, it's just such a beautiful story, and clearly any doubts that you have about being a storyteller, I hope, have been completely dispelled, because trust me, you are a natural at telling stories and bringing people into that journey and kind of helping them to feel part of it. And that's what a good storyteller does, is they tell you the story, but they also bring you with them and include you in it, so that you get taken away. And that's certainly how I felt as the reader, reading the book. And I know from our conversations, also within that chest that you found at your grandma's, there was an interview you'd done with your grandfather, wasn't there, when you were 15? Can you tell us about that?
It wasn't in that particular box. It wasn't, and this box was labeled George Precious. And there were obviously all these fantastic, there were all the correspondence that he received and also sent. So he'd obviously later compiled some of the letters that he'd sent back with the letters that he'd received whilst he was a prisoner of war. There were certificates in there because he also studied. But you're right, there was something else. And I knew that he'd written a script called A Month of Sundays, which was a play based on his experience. And I thought, well, it must be in the house somewhere. So I went up into the loft to look for it. And then I found some more things. And amongst that was a tiny envelope, just one of those old brown envelopes. And inside that was a tape. And all I had was, it had no markings on the actual tape, but on the outside of the envelope, it just said Amy and George 1990. And I'm thinking, I have no idea what this is. Absolutely no idea. And I didn't have a micro cassette player to play it on. My mum did. It was broken. It hadn't been used for decades. So there I am on eBay frantically getting another one, and it arrives. And not only does it arrive, but it arrives on the 15th of April, which is his birthday. So, you know, here we go. Another sign that this is all meant to happen. So April 2023. So, you know, a year past finding the book. This is all part of this whole universe is conspiring to make this happen. What's on that tape? Me interviewing him, age 15, about his experience as a prisoner of war. And I don't remember recording it, Kim-Adele. I really don't. How was that? How do I not remember? And why? I don't even know why I was recording it, but I did. And it's because of that tape that I felt that I had his permission to use the journal entries. And I do talk about the fact that he might not have wanted me to have shared some of these moments, but I've been very careful with what I have shared. But also, I do believe that there is an importance in sharing some of our vulnerable moments in life, because it really does help other people to understand that what they might be going through, they're not alone, that it's a shared experience, that we all go through this. But also it helped me to understand when I was writing that he didn't start where I saw him. Well, he wasn't always where I saw him. So I knew him obviously in his 70s and obviously 60s. But he started and crafted his writing career in this book. So I saw him playing, crafting, learning his purposeful way of living that he was going to follow. And I think that was also part of why I wanted to include it, so that you could see the makings of the man that I would later come to see, which then also follows my journey of me and how I've come to where I am. And it hasn't just been an overnight success. My goodness, this book has certainly not been an overnight success. It's taken a long time.
I love that. And I think you're right. I think sometimes we have to share some of that vulnerability to help people realize that, unfortunately, these days, everything's a little bit too airbrushed, isn't it? And a little bit too perfect looking. And yet that's not the reality of what happens behind the scenes. I always think, someone said to me the other day, you're swan-like. I'm like, yeah, ugly under the water. It's like pedaling like Billy-O to try and look graceful. But it's important that we share some of those things. And I love that actually, as you've just shared, it's helping you see the journey and the impact of living that life with purpose and with focus, and really taking control and being we are all the author of our own life, but we don't always take the pen, do we? We don't always take control of it and say, actually, what's my purpose? What's my why? Why am I doing this? And I know obviously from your podcast and everything, all of that has been pulling to creating that life of intentionality, so that you are clear on where you're going and you are taking positive action every day to achieve those goals, to move them forward. And I think by sharing the lived experience of not just your lived experience, but also your grandfather's lived experience, which created the man that you came to know as your grandfather, that therefore allowed him to share his learned experience with you, and how that shaped, I think, is what makes the book just so mesmerizing. Because you see that. And I think when we see people who've lived through an experience that we might now be facing, it gives us hope, doesn't it? That actually there's a way through, that there is another side. Would you agree?
I totally agree. And it was because of that hope, but also the courage, the work that's involved. It's doesn't necessarily always come easily. And the parallel that I am drawing here, using his story alongside mine, is that clearly I have a lot more freedom than he did, in terms of I'm not in captivity. I'm not being held in captivity against my will. And I have got the infinite amount of possibility of what I can do. But by using his story alongside that, it just goes to show that regardless of the circumstances, there are still ways. And there are still ways that you can ultimately craft your purposeful life. And he used resources. He was, he absolutely used collaborative ways of working. He reached out to people for books, for help. He was studying for degrees while he was in camp. He was studying via the University of London. The Red Cross would send him books. And it was just incredible that it doesn't matter really what's happening externally in terms of the limitations that there were on him. He was still able to internally free himself and free his mind. And he wasn't ever interested in escaping. And I mean a physical escape, but he certainly managed to escape from everything in his mind or through his mind. And that was the message, or that is the message that I'm sharing here, that regardless of your circumstances, you're still able to choose a way forward and choose to live this life of intentionality. And I do draw also some parallels to Viktor Frankl, not in any way the circumstances of their confinement, that was not comparable at all. But the fact that they both documented their experiences, and they both documented how they were able to navigate the challenges that they had. And yes, there's hope was part of that, but also a recognition of reality, of what else was happening, and of understanding or that it was up to you to take responsibility. So yes, the core message from my book is also that freedom, responsibility, hope, courage, vulnerability. There are many. And it's not a prescribed way of life here that I'm dictating at all. It is giving you a framework from which you then use to choose and create and carve your own way of life.
I love that. It reminds me of one of my favorite quotes at the moment, which I'm trying really hard to live by, which is, I'm not the victim of my circumstance, I'm the product of my choice. And he had awful circumstances, and as you said, Viktor Frankl, horrendous circumstances, but they chose to do the things they could do, to do the bits that they could see. And I think sometimes we can get ourselves held back on what we can't control. And actually, what the book shares, what your grandfather shares, is that's not going to get you anywhere because you can't control it. But if you focus on the things you can control and you take positive choices about those, you can change your circumstances. You can move with them. So could you share with us what you've found has been the importance of having a purpose in life and how that's helped you in your journey?
Yeah, so I actually open up the book with this because it seems like the right place to start in terms of sharing the premise of why living with a purpose is important to me, why the work I'm doing, why I'm even writing a book, having a podcast, which has had 425 episodes at the time of recording, and speaking here today. So what is it that's important to me is I know firsthand the difference between living and existing. And what I mean by that is I'd been swept up, and so had my husband, with living a life that wasn't necessarily ours. We'd been rolled, or I don't know, just moved forward is probably the best way to describe it, with this living in London, the compromises that you make, the sort of treading water, the commuting, and just trying to chase something, but without ever really thinking and stopping and defining what it is that we are chasing, just being caught in that. And what happened was one evening when my husband came home and I just looked across the room. It was late. He'd come back late from work, as he had done for years. This wasn't just a new scenario. And I just like, I don't even know who you are. I don't recognize you. You don't look well. And I then recognized that we'd both been sort of living in this fog, and we were blind to what had been going on, and things had to change. So it was at that point that I recognized that we'd been existing and not living, and I choose those words to reflect the difference between one being with purpose and one being without, because it is possible to live a life without purpose, and it's also possible to live a life quite happily without a purpose. But it's very different to being fulfilled and engaged and feel as though you have this reason for being and for affecting change or making a difference, whatever the phrase is that sings to you. So it was then I shifted and started learning and started understanding more. Personal development and growth are very important to me. That learning had always been something that I was very keen on, but this was an area of my life that I hadn't focused on. So yes, I resigned from my job and I focused on planning a change in our lifestyle for us as a family. And it was the deterioration of our health that had prompted that, and to create a more sustainable and more fulfilling lifestyle. So I went in search of all the questions that people ask is, what is my purpose? Why am I here? And also, what can I do to affect change for us as a family? I built a business. It took me 3 years. And then that meant John could exit his role in the city. And we are very much more now focused and clear about what's important, what's sustainable, what it is that we want, and everything we do has got that at the center and the core of it. And it was at the beginning of lockdown when another business closed. I wasn't expecting it to, but actually it opened this new door for me to move from property investing and training, and also had a podcast in property, helping other people to understand the practical side of investing, to using that medium, which I loved, which is the podcast, to talk about purpose. And within a month, I had launched a new podcast, Focus on Why. And here I am now with the book that I have embedded so many of those learnings and the difference of this living and existing.
I love that. I mean, it so resonates. I think I know certainly I've been very guilty of kind of going with the flow of kind of my focus being a little bit too short-sighted. It's like, how do I pay the bills next month, and how do I make sure that we've got those parts, as opposed to really thinking about what's my purpose, what am I here for, what am I going to change. And I think once you put that effort in, I know one of the things Scott and I did, I think about 3 years ago now, was we came up with a family mission statement. So we sat and spent time together. What's our family mission? What's our purpose? And that was to live a life of passionate curiosity and to pass our thoughts, words, and deeds through the lenses of, is it kind? Is it honest? And does it add value? And if we couldn't say yes to all three, we had to make a different choice. And it's really changed how we make our decisions, how we're able to start saying no to things, because I was very good at saying no to things. So I think having that purpose really does help you hone in, doesn't it? Help you to drive that. And I love your podcast, and I've had the privilege of being on it. But again, I love that what you're sharing with the world through those stories is other people's lived experience, and demonstrating, as you said so eloquently, that this book is not a dictatorship of how you should live a life. It's saying that there's a methodology of helping you find your purpose, and that's it. It's yours. It's not anybody else's. We don't have to look around at what the person next to us wrote and compare and go, this might look like yours, because it should. Because actually, I think that's certainly what I was doing wrong before I learned my purpose, was I was trying to make sure it matched everybody else's. And then you can live it, but you're not really loving it, are you? It's finding that. How do you find the thing that makes your soul sing, that allows you to not feel like you're working anymore? And it strikes me every time I talk to you that that's what you found. The thing that makes your soul sing, the thing that goes, actually, this isn't work. this is my why. This is my and when you've got that, it changes the energy around it, doesn't it? It changes the focus. So what else would you like to achieve in your lifetime? Because you've already achieved so much.
Well, it's funny you say that, but I had a vision recently which was very clear, and it involves my cousin and myself having created another medium for this, and it's to actually turn it into a film. So he writes screenplays, and so I'm going over to, he lives in America, and I'm going over there to talk about how we can actually convert the book into a screenplay.
Oh my God, that's amazing. I've got so many questions about that, but that will just be epic. Is there a particular part of the book that talks to you that you'd like to share with us?
There's so many parts, and I think if I just help explain how I've put it together. So what I've done is I've divided it into the 9 steps. I have a framework, and it's got 9 steps, of which there are 3 core parts. So the book is in have a purpose, have a plan, focus on why. So they're the 3 elements. What happens after each of the 3 steps within those 3 parts is that I talk about, let's go through the first one. The first step is control. So I talk about control, what you can and what you can't. And then I include some extracts of George's, my grandfather's scrapbook. And then I provide 3 or 4 reflection with action exercises, which are for you to take on board and embody and really embrace what it has been discussed. This book is not something that you read once. I want this book to be a companion that walks through life alongside with you. And it's something that you can dip in and out of. It's a resource, but it's also a story. There will be things that when you come back to it, you see in a different light because of how you've evolved. So bizarrely, or not bizarrely, because this is just the way that the book has formed, each of George's extracts just fitted perfectly. I didn't have to engineer them. It's chronological, so I've just gone through them. I've had to leave a lot out, and it was really very upsetting to leave a lot out of his elements. He's got some beautiful poems that I've had to not include just because of word count and things. But there is a moment, and it's in the control element, where let me just read you that bit and then it will make sense. So 26th of March, 1940, Ramsgate. 2 officers, brothers, one of them at least, proud as a peacock. One brother gets into the carriage. The other stays on the platform, swishing his swagger stick. Embarrassed, we shake hands, say goodbye, absurdly, unnaturally casual. The train moves out, and I lean from the window. We both wave a hand once, and then Donald turns and is lost to sight. Now, what I then do in George's sections is I just add in a few of my own interpretations or comments in between. And this is what I've said. This beautiful and touching farewell between 2 brothers represents a difficult moment many experience saying goodbye to their loved ones during the war. Notice how the entry switches mid-paragraph from 3rd person to 1st person, from detachment to personalization. Of course, he didn't know it then, but this was the last time George and his brother would ever see one another, as tragically Donald would indeed be lost to sight. So I don't explain what happens to Donald at that point. It comes later. But just adding it in there, it just is like, wow, those words now mean something so different. And it's just every word that I've put in this book means something. It's been very intentional, and yeah, so
Wow. I love so many parts of the book, but I love that actually it's the way that, like, obviously they were written, those words, prior to any knowledge, and then you're reading them with knowledge, and see just how poignant they really were, and just that extra layer that goes on to everything that happens in our life. And I often think life only really makes sense in the rearview mirror, but it's only once we've got through it that you look back and go, oh, okay, so that's why that meant. But how often do we find, just like you'd said, at the start when you went to that meditation, and your grandfather was with you, and obviously you said, but it was me voicing both parts, but actually I think they are with us, and we can connect in, because sometimes you go back and you go, well, I know what they'd say to me if I was faced with this situation, and it is as if they're yelling it in your ear, and you can hear the voice, because you've got that connection, that I guess that legacy that they've left, that means that you can kind of really go back and re-feel that the emotion that goes alongside the advice that they come to. And I think that for me is one of the beautiful things that you've done in the book, is you've shared that connectivity, but also you've shared the wisdom of hindsight. So when it was written by George, he couldn't know what he couldn't know. But when you're reading it, you've got the benefit of what happened next. And we can see, therefore, how things get shaped in a different way. And that helps us to understand that everything we're going through right now, we could shape it in a different way. We could choose a different perspective, and be more intentional about it. And what I love, and it was quite clear for me when I was reading the book, is how intentional it has been. And I can't begin to imagine how hard it must have been to factor out what to include and what not to include, because I imagine there was so many. But maybe that's in book 2.
Well, yeah, I mean, my first draft was 135,000 words, and I then edited it down to 86,000 words and submitted it to my publisher. And she came back. So I had a developmental editor, and she came back to me. She said, I love it. I've read it twice. And I've only just realized that it's over what we've contracted you to write by 30,000 words. So you'll need to cut that out within the month. So I then worked for 31 days straight of 17 hours a day to cut out those words. Now, because it wasn't just a simple cutting out of the words, it then meant I needed to ensure the flow was still there, and that there was this thread that stayed with you, that kept you wanting to read more, that then didn't feel too disjointed, didn't feel too abrupt. So it wasn't as simple as I had wanted it to be, but now it's a much better book for it. I think if it had been that sort of 86,000 word version, it might have been that you still couldn't put it down. But I think that the fact that it is a little bit shorter really does hold your attention, and you think, actually, I'm going to get through this. And in terms of, I can consume this in one go, and it doesn't feel overwhelming. And it is that very different style. I didn't want to just write another personal development book on purpose, because there are some great ones out there. I wanted it to have this difference to it. And so that was the story element. So it had to be that there was a right balance. It also, for me, had to be that there had to be some way of application, so that you could take away that learning. And I gave you some guidance as to how. Obviously, there'll be lots of ways that you choose independently to take any of the learnings forward. But those reflection with action exercises are a great way for you to not only live and put your purpose into action, but to really understand what the meaning is to the moments that you're assigning, and know, as you said just now, that you have the choice to assign different meanings to moments, and that it is within your power to do that. It really is. So you are so responsible for the action that you subsequently take as a result of the meaning that you assign to every moment. And that cycle of is life. That is what happens. One moment after the other happens. But it has been, I have to say, writing this book has brought my grandfather back to life. Every day that I've been part of writing and reading his words and listening to the recordings and just reliving the moments that we spent together has brought into life. And I remember when I got married in 2001, my dad read out in the speech that I'd said to my father at some point that whenever I had a problem, I would always imagine, well, what would George have done? What would he have said to me? What would he have encouraged me to have done or whatever? And it is true, still to today. Sometimes I'm like, I don't know what to do here. What would George say? And there are a couple of signs that I always look for. One's a rainbow and one's a robin, and both of those I see a lot. And that's my grandfather there, just showing me that he's around still.
Oh, Amy, I love that. And yeah, for me, it's always been butterflies. And my dad died earlier this year, and there hasn't been a day since where there hasn't been a butterfly that's come past my window at least once. And it allows you to channel into that. What would they say? What advice would they give me right now? And you can still tap into that. But what I love is, and you sharing that, you're giving other people. And I love the reflections with actions, because actually we can reflect, but if we don't add the action to it, we're not going to move forward. We've had a nice chat, a nice think about it, but we've not taken that next piece. So I love that actually throughout that, it's the making sure we do both. We read the book, but we do something with it. We take that action. Amy, you've already shared so much, but if I could ask you, is there anything that you've learned that you wish you'd learned sooner?
Do you know, I remember my art teacher saying to me when I was 11, 12, Amy, you need to have courage of conviction. And I think that is something that, in fact, I had the privilege of seeing her last year and reminding her that she said that to me at that young age, but it's only really in the last few years that I've understood what she meant. And I didn't understand at the time. I mean, yes, I understood the words, but I didn't really understand how to do that. And I think that having the courage of conviction to pursue your own purposeful way of life and not feel as though you need to bend to familial or societal or social paradigms to just be true to who you are. I mean, look at your name of your business. It's authentic achievements. That is what I wish I had the courage to do, is to be more authentically me and not try and be anyone else. And it's only now, I don't know whether that just is the case at this time of life, that you have that wisdom and the courage to do that. But I think that's probably would be my advice, is just to be more courageous into stepping into who I am.
Oh, Amy, I love that. And you're right. When I changed the name of my business a few years ago, I realized that actually my biggest goal was to live my authentic life and be comfortable with that, and the fact that it wouldn't be right for everybody else, but that's okay. And you're right, it takes courage, and mine took a lot of years before I learned it. So I don't know if it's wisdom that comes with age or hopefully, I'm trying to share it with my little girl now, to go, don't wait as long as I did, take that courage now. So Amy, tell us more about how people can get involved. Obviously, we'll have it all in the show notes below, but kind of what next with the book, and how do people get their copy, and how do they get to know more about you and how to work with you?
Well, my website is amyrowlinson.com, so absolutely go there and connect with me. Reach out, connect with me on LinkedIn or Facebook or Instagram, Twitter, wherever you preside. I also am there. In fact, I've also now dabbled with TikTok, so you can follow me there too. But it's a case of, for the book, yes, it's going to be available Amazon or on my website. You can find the links there. I just really want to encourage you to think about what it is. Oh, and the podcast, my goodness, listen to the podcast too. Encourage you to think about what it is that you've taken from just this conversation that we've had today. What is it that you want to reflect on a little bit more and challenge, and have the courage to take forward in your own way to creating that purposeful way of life?
I love that. And I'm just going to briefly share, if you don't mind, a piece on courage that is about us too, to be fair. So we met through a friend, a mutual friend, Helen. And I remember when she first booked in my calendar, looking at it thinking, oh my goodness, she's picked the wrong person. This is going to be really awkward. She's not going to want to talk to me. And we ended up hitting it off and getting on famously. And then she introduced me to you, and we were out for dinner a few times until the time where I shared that with you both. And you were smirking away and going, I was like, what are you smirking? That's not like you. To which Helen and you both shared that it had taken you a couple of months to pluck up the courage to message me in the first place. And I was thinking, how hilarious. So I was there thinking, you definitely aren't going to want to talk to me because you're far too important and impressive, and you felt exactly the same. And I share that purely from anybody who is reticent about reaching out to you. I strongly suggest you do it, because the things that we often are holding ourselves back from are the things that are out there waiting for us. So I think to take that moment, to have the courage of their convictions, and to definitely to read the book. Amy, it's been a delight. I can't wait to hear the success of the book and for our next conversation. Thank you for coming on and sharing with us just a beautiful story of you and George and the impact it can have on everybody who can read it.
Thank you.
And to everybody listening and watching, I hope you found it as insightful and enjoyable as I did. And I'd love to hear your feedback when you read the book. And until next time, take care.